Start. Welcome to everybody. Thanks for being here. We're a small group, and in any case, I thought it would probably make more sense in terms of having a conversation around the motivational interviewing that I proposed as a conversation for this afternoon. And perhaps from my side, what interested me in going down the rabbit hole with this one is I think a few things. The first was an interview I listened to where Ted Lons had, where he said the value he found of taking a motivational interviewing approach with his financial planning clients. And then I started going back and looking at some of the research that was done, and I actually found research that was done in the financial planning context and financial coaching context, and specifically from a financial psychology research was done in the US, specifically around motivational interviewing. And then then I started looking at what is the parallels between motivational interviewing and then ontology as such. And interesting, when I went and looked at Miller and Rolnick, which did the initial, or they actually the fathers of motivational interviewing, when I looked at that, the definition in terms of motivational interviewing that says motivational interviewing is a collaborative and a goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It is designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commit to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So that for me spark then further to say, we, from an ontological viewpoint, we say each person is unique, and we actually want to help clients to create the capacity to have more choice in terms of how they approach their finances and life as such. And then if I look at attention to the language and change as such, that for me then brings me back to also ontology, where we work with language to say what is the assertions and assessments the client is holding, and then within that also motivation is where we say mood is a predisposition for action, is then speaking to, if we can get clients to have the right approach or right mood in terms of their relationship with whatever the issue is, and we can address the assumptions they've got in terms of the assertions that they hold, then we can most probably help the client to make a different choice in terms of where they are at. If I further went and looked at some of the definitions, they said the central idea behind motivational interviewing is that people are more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when they are motivated and confident in their abilities to change. Motivational interviewing focus on helping clients identify and resolve their doubts about change by exploring and resolving the conflicts and concerns. The coach works to support the client in identifying and developing an intrinsic motivation needed to make a change, rather than trying to impose change from an external source. Interesting, the American Financial Therapy Association just released some new research in terms of where they looked at knowledge, financial literacy, they looked at financial confidence, and the relationship between that. And what they found was that if clients have got the knowledge but they haven't got the confidence, then they found that clients actually didn't take action or change their behavior. Welcome, Lizelle. And so this started my going down the rabbit hole in terms of you know, what interested me in terms of this, because I thought it can definitely help us in terms of our engagement. Although if we look at the process, it's most probably um, sitting on the fence of directive coaching versus more indirect coaching model. I think, or it made me curious to explore a little bit further. So I don't know that as an introduction. You know, what is some of the questions that comes up perhaps for you, when for those of you that downloaded the document and sludge through, I think, 15 pages of it. You know, what made you curious to be here and dial in for this afternoon's conversation before we go a little bit further in terms of some of the further components of it, which I found interesting as I started going down. But just as an introduction, perhaps, what made you curious, you know, to drop in here? 100%, Lizelle. Also, all of the best for you with your daughter.
Hendrik, if I can say, for me, the problem always lies with, I will give a fantastic plan through to the client, but then the client does not complete their homework, like for instance, budgeting or reviewing the bank statements or coming back to me with the necessary information. So that's always been a huge problem for me, where I felt like both sides needs to commit. I don't have a fairy tale stick that I can just tap the wand and make all their problems disappear. So for me, that is the carrot in front of me is, if I can get to a way of communicating with the clients so that they can understand why this change is necessary and find out what will motivate them to actually go and do their side of the homework. Yeah, and I've read through the whole document and I can see exactly where I need to focus a bit more on getting the client to take responsibility. It's not my responsibility just to give the silver bullet solution at the end of the day.
Thanks for that, Madeleine. There's two thoughts. One is the change part that we'll get to now, but the other one is in advice that sticks. Moira Summers has got such a picture where she says we as financial planners and financial coaches is always competing with something else, because the client coming into our office has most probably got a plate of food, but that plate of food is already full. So between that is their job and further development and their kids and their house and everything that goes on. And we need a little bit of face time on that plate, because they need to take something else off the plate to put what is so much more important onto the plate. And that also let me think about what you're saying, Madeleine, is how do you get them to take off something from that plate and replace it? And for that, you need the motivation for them to say, you know, I'm going to take a small slice of this. I'm going to watch an hour this week less series and replace it with doing the homework Madeleine has given for me, because my finances and my life is more important than the hour of watching series or whatever the case may be. Somewhere we competing for airtime on that plate in front of them, you know. So yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Any other thoughts, perhaps? I'll then jump perhaps in the document is part 5 of let's say division 5 of the document, or part 5 of the document, is some of the stuff that we as financial coaches need to be um, careful where we can actually derail the process is, is the first one they enlist in terms of motivational interviewing as judgments is, um, for us, it's most probably something that's logical. The client needs to change, um, or ought to change. However, for the client, they've got 10 other things going on. And in the back of their minds, they most probably came into our offices with a specific reason. However, there's competing priorities. On the other side, there's assumptions that we can make. And it's an interesting something that Moira Summers also said when she did her research initially under medical patients um, is the client came to us as the specialist, just as a client goes to a specialist and say, I've got a problem in terms of weight loss, and please help me. Going to the dietitian, for example, is the client wants to change, but that's not necessarily totally true. Is what is the primary motivations behind um, uh, the the client, and secondly, do they actually see the challenge they are having? I'm thinking of a doctor that once told the story about the client that came in that was totally overweight, and the doctor said to the patient, okay, tell me, what is your normal diet? And the client started talking and say, okay, when I drive to work, I drink a can of soda. At tea time, I drink a can of soda. At lunchtime, I drink a can of soda. And at tea time in the afternoon, I drink a can of soda. And on my way home, I drink a can of soda with all the other stuff the client is having. And the doctor said, what do you think is actually the problem for you battling with weight gain? And the client said, but irritated, that's why I'm with you, to find out. And the doctor say, just listen to what you currently told me. And um, the client said, or the patient said, but there's no problem in what I told you now. I can't see. Yeah, and sometimes our clients also, we make an assumption that it's logic, but it's not, and then the frustration, what Madeleine just shared with us, but we are doing everything in our power to help you in the process. So why aren't you doing anything from your side? And that also making our own assessments in terms of the client's work. And I find this, I just worked through a group of financial coaches going through the 12-week program. Is we tend sometimes, due to the fact that we are professionals, we tend to make declarations on behalf um, of the client. So we see the client actually needs to do this, and then listening to the conversations and perhaps giving an example is getting to the point, helping the client through the coaching process, and then saying to the client, so what I hear now is you're going to do this and this and this. So making the declaration on behalf of the client instead of what are you prepared based on our conversation now, that what are you going to do, so that the client actually makes the declaration and decide what they are going to do. And then our strategy versus the client strategy. And then it is our job is to be smart, especially as financial planners, and we love to bring that experience to the client. However, what is the client situation and what will work best for the client? And we saw this movie 100 times perhaps previously. We know exactly what the client needs to do, but it's the first time the client needs to go through this journey. And how do we help them to firstly create the awareness, and through the process? Because sometimes it's like a child playing a game. They learned how to do something in a certain way. They keep on doing it. but they're not actually understanding what is causing the pain in their life. But it's actually the way that they've been doing everything all along, and they do not see that relationship between what's causing them pain and what is the actual pain is. If we can bring the realization through the coaching process and questions, so that we can get them to a place where they actually understand what is causing the pain, and then they'll have the motivation to go back and say, okay, but I'm no longer comfortable with the pain that I'm experiencing. What else is the options that I've got, and what else is the things that I can go and do? And most probably they'll end up where we think is the right place that they need to go. However, they need to go through that process to understand the relationship between what they are doing, what is causing them the pain, and then taking a new approach to it. So that perhaps as some of the pitfalls. Any thoughts from your side? How do you see it playing out in your coaching practices, and how do you see it playing out with your clients as you are engaging with your clients?
Yeah, for me it is. I don't think you can intrinsically motivate somebody if they don't want to do that themselves. And I don't have many clients, but the ones that we have had, some people are ready to do their homework. They want to check out call, they have things that they've ready and prepared to discuss when we get together. And other people, make the excuses. So I think you can only go as far as, as as we're saying, as your client is ready for. Yeah, and I don't know when it, you say, come back when you're ready.
Yeah, so in NLP, there's something, Annie and Sam, thanks for your message. I see it that you're battling with connection. Because in NLP, there's a saying that the client will change as far as our rapport with the client, and is how do we do that dance? Rick Keller also in one of the books, I think that's it's financial coaching, health. That book of his that he wrote together with Brett Lonsey. He says is how do we recalibrate also in that process. So, and I think it's an important point that you're making, Annie, and it also refers to Madeleine's point is then, and it goes back then to point 3 of that document that says how ready is the client for change, and what is our methodology at that point in time? Because most probably that client that we that is not engaging in the process is most probably either, which if we look at that change cycle that forms part of the motivational interviewing book, is most probably sitting in that pre-contemplation or contemplation. Most probably pre-contemplation is they feeling some pain, they seeing things is happening, but they either not feeling enough pain, or they so caught up in that pain that they think that is how life should be. Most probably it could be that for generations they are already experiencing finances as that is to say, how do we meet then the client at that point of pre-contemplation, is to say, how do we take the client from there, because pre-contemplation is that point most probably is I'm coming to see, Annie, I want financial coaching. However, I'm either so ashamed of my finances, or I'm so afraid to go and explore something else, or I'm just so caught up in life that I haven't got the energy. Versus contemplation is that phase where the client is starting to understand what is causing the pain, starting to understand that their behavior is problematic and what alternatives are there, where preparation is then is at that point I now want to start changing and I'm prepared to do the work, is to say, where's the clients that is sitting in front of me and that I'm engaging with? Where are they in terms of this change process, and what can I do to meet them wherever they are in the change process? Because if I can get to the point of action, as at that point in time, my client is most probably in the right mood and is starting to change their story, and they want to start taking action. They are doing the homework, etc. Where if they are in that pre-contemplation versus contemplation phase, pre-contemplation even more is a lot of the work is then for us is to raise awareness, ask the questions, and explore. To your point is, are they ready to start thinking about change? Where in contemplation is, we can start working with, in what mood are you? What alternative mood can thing is work better for you? Also working with what is the things that's keeping you from making a change? Exploring things like perhaps the whole thing about the assertions they carry with them, the stories they tell them, things like fear, like shame, etc. We can start exploring there. Is what is that ambivalence that they are sitting with in terms of contemplation? That paradoxes that they've got within themselves. Just a few thoughts. If we go back to this model, which can perhaps help us with those lines. I don't know. Any other thoughts, perhaps?
Indrek, I realize now that I think most of the clients that we meet for the first time are actually in this pre-contemplation stage, because you don't know what you don't know. So if you felt that pain for generations already, to say, in our family, we will never have enough money, for instance. So the client might not see that that's a problem. And then your role as financial advisor or coach will then basically to guide them so that they can see that there is actually another way of living than to be trapped in this story for generations. And I think to explore on their mood so that they can realize the shame or the fear or the guilt that they're actually experiencing and why they are experiencing it. So there's a little bit of a light bulb for me, because I think a lot of clients that comes into the office does not actually realize they have a problem. And because we deal with it often, we can see immediately, oh, here's a problem. But to actually guide them so that they also understand that there is a problem.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, is creating, I think that you started with is what you don't know, and that's their reality. That's the story they live with, irrespective. So is, how do you work from that point forward, so yeah. Yes, Johan.
Thanks, Hendrik. So I remember many years ago reading a book by Ben Feldman. And I'm just going to try and paraphrase what he said. But essentially, he said something in the line of, every person, and he used the word man, has got a desire to take care of his family. And that's talking within the insurance selling environment. And he said, well, all that you need to do as the insurance salesperson is determine the size of the fire that you need to light under that person to get them going. And that's basically what I'm hearing here also, is that we need to approach people with different degrees and levels of, call it shock therapy. to get them to the point to say, well, I actually need to make changes now. I mean, it's quite simple when you're feeling ill and you're going to the doctor. You know, you go to a doctor, you're feeling pretty bad. The doctor's going to give you medication, and a few days later, you should feel better. Unfortunately, with finances, it's not quite that case. It's a long-term endeavor. So, as to looking at what tools of motivation to use to get that person to get over into action and then also sustain that action going forward. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's where, from a positive psychology viewpoint, we would rather like to focus on, you know, working with the positives, is working with the client's aspirations. What is your ideal life? You know, what is important for you in life, and then also what goals do you want to achieve? You know, what aspirations have you got? Is to your point, Unita, is from your point, Johan, is to say, you know, the fire we would like to light is most probably comes from a positive psychology. What gives you meaning? You know, what relationships, back to your point, you know, when I started in the industry, one of the key things that they learned us was, you know, what about mom and the kids? You know, but that was from a fear viewpoint. You know, what is going to happen with mom and the kids if something happens with you? You know, from our side, we say we've got both those sides of the coin. Is we want to work with, you know, what is your dreams, aspirations, and what is important in life for you on the one side, and on the other side, what transitions can happen in your life that can derail your plans, and how do we kindle both of those conversations with the client? Because if we can get that going, then we can get the client to move from most probably contemplation in terms of the change cycle to the point where the client starts contemplating and thinking, okay, but if I actually want this better life, if I want this, protect my family, friend, etc., extended family, etc., then I need to start changing, and that's where we then start having the conversation. And I think the important thing then of motivational interviewing is also, which most probably also you can nearly say is sitting also under that, what is the things that keeping us from engaging or can derail our process, is to say, and I think that somewhere from an expert viewpoint we sometimes go wrong, is I'm the expert, I know best, is one of the key principles is what they call roll with resistance, is to say, keep it open, is to say, oh, but you actually is express empathy. It must be feel terrible to have grown up in a house where there was never enough money. It must feel terrible that your family always is asking you for money, and you working so hard. You're a first generation person that is doing well. And then start playing with that, what they call recognized discrepancy, is to say, what is that paradox? Is the client wants a better life, but is caught up in the story. How do we work with that discrepancy instead of going against, because we normally want to give facts, so many people cannot retire. So many people get cancer. So many people pass away. Only 50% of estates can be administrated due to a lack of funds in the estate. Is to go with the resistance and say, okay, this is how you see the world, but how is it impacting actually on yourself? And then the other thing is then focusing on from a positive psychology viewpoint again on, but there is great things that you are already doing. So how can you use that great things to create a better life? There's a leadership book Perfect Leadership Storm that was actually written by millennials. And in the book, actually, the millennials that wrote the book makes an interesting point. They say Gen X's told millennials, you can do anything in your life that you want, because that is what Gen X's wanted from the world. However, when our millennial children started wanting everything they want in the world, we started saying to them, but this is impossible, you can't have it. And that is a little bit, if I look at this self-efficiency as well as the process of rolling with the resistance, is to say, okay, but there is great things that you are doing, so how can you just take that same energy that is not working for you and redeploy it in terms of make it a mood of wonder, make it a mood of possibility, and start exploring those alternatives. So yeah, using that key principles of motivational interviewing, then let me think a lot of positive psychology is to focus on the things that can work. So I don't know, that just as a key thought. I don't know, whoever wants to come in and from a practical viewpoint is perhaps share how you think it can work. So I think that the one thing is a little bit coming in and siding a little bit. What I find from the motivational interviewing is, instead of we traditionally we want to prove the facts on the other side of the fence, we actually is to a certain extent that we say as coaches, we're walking alongside our client. In terms of motivational interviewing, we actually siding with them and walking with them. However, we want to expose the assertions and the beliefs that they carry, which is not healthy for them to start engaging with the process. You know. So I don't know. Do you think it can work?
Hendrik, if I
Yes,
can
Madeleine.
say,
Yes.
on your document under section 8, the motivational interview process, you gave some examples on step 3, evoking, which I am going to focus a bit on, because they evoke reflective thinking, that word impact or the word problem, how do you feel? So you can actually use those words in any content. And so if the client can get to a point where they admit, for instance, in your example, overspending or bad eating habits or whatever their problem is, just by using those strong words so that they can start giving the answers. Because I often think our personalities as financial coaches is that we are fixers. I know it's my biggest problem. So I just want to help people, and I want to show them I can make a change on their behalf, which this whole process I've learned that it's not my problem to solve. I can just merely coach them by asking the right questions and using this interviewing skills basically for them to get to their own answers.
Yeah, I think that's a key point you're making there, Madeleine. Any other thoughts? Lizelle, I don't know if you're at a space where you can share your thoughts, but You always have got a lot of wisdom to share.
Okay, so I'm sorry about this. I was actually I was actually busy with the doctors and I missed almost the whole thing. So from my side, I'll watch the recording. I really tried to. I just logged in again. Okay.
100% thanks, Lizelle.
All
All of the best for you. So I think then the other part of the motivational interviewing process, which you know, if we do that part 8 of the document, which Madeleine refers to, you know, is I think it speaks very much to our standard coaching process, you know, to start with building a rapport, understanding what is the focus areas, and understanding that mixed feelings that clients have got, because most probably that's part of why they are with they came into our office, the motivation to start seeking advice and working with that tension and ambivalence in terms of the process. And if we have got the rapport in the first place, started eliciting the motivation and helping the client to build that self-confidence in themselves, to be willing to understand they have got the power to make that change, then we are moving to the point to step 3 that Madeleine referred to, is evoking that change, which we can then either use open-ended questions, focus on the values and goals that we said, what is important for the client, the process that we already are using, what is the motivations the client is, the aspirations the client have got, reflecting that back to the client as such, and then understand what is the alternatives for the client, but then also start evoking that is that they start thinking about, nearly like we would in terms of the ontological coaching process, evoke change through the using mood as such, is moving from anxiety to wonder, moving from resentment to acceptance, moving from resignation to possibility, and also then grounding assessments about, you know, what about you believing what is so important for you is important for you, is that they start thinking about, you know, why are they holding those, what is the reasons that they're holding that truths which is no longer truths and serving them, is using some of that evoke reflective thinking, you know, is, for instance, how does overspending impact your life, both in the present as well as in the long term. What is keeping you awake at night? If you decide to change your behavior to overcome this challenge, think about difficult goals you have achieved in the past. How did you accomplish them? You know, again, drawing on the positive, and using, you know, focusing on them is focus on the strengths that support them and surround them. Who's people they can draw on? What is some of the strengths that they've got? What is the skills they can draw on? You know, how do we help them to work with that? Addressing resistance, you know, how do we work with the resistance? And then going back and focusing on where are they in this change cycle, and helping them to start moving on in terms of where they are and how they can deal with that as such. And if we can get past that resistance and to the point that Johan said, if we can light the fire in them, then we've got the fuel and motivation so that we can move them and start the planning process. Interesting, if we look at the work of George Kinder, he says that part of getting past change is and to Johan's point, is George Kinder talks about lightening the torch, is that we get so much energy and motivation that we can then move towards the point where we can help clients to deal with the things that's challenges for us, for them. And that's even the point where we can then come into the conversation where we can say and challenge them and say, you know, we hear you saying that. How is impacting? Because if the energy is big enough, we can even go and challenge those stories that we are observing that we are afraid is going to derail the process is, then we can deal with that because the energy we've got is big enough to move the dial beyond the resistance that can come from the process. You know, Brett or Ted Klons says he was once asked by a financial advisor in the US to come and talk to this entrepreneur that was doing brilliantly. However, he had a lot of debt and he didn't want to take out life cover. And the motivation for not taking out life cover was due to the fact that at a point in time, his own dad passed away with life cover, and that left them actually without money. However, that made him, that caused him to have that story in his mind that life cover is not good due to the fact that they suffered, and why must I take out life cover? And Ted said he walked into the office, first built rapport, and then said to the client, okay, you know, I'm here due to the fact to have a conversation around the fact that you're doing brilliantly, as you told me now. However, you've got a lot of debt in terms of properties, etc. You know, tell me more about that. What is the reasons? And the client actually told him that comes from his childhood, and he don't believe in life cover because his dad didn't believe in life cover, and it didn't help them, the life cover that there was, and the whole story. And then Ted looked at him, and after he told his story, and he said, okay, that's great. So actually what you're telling me, I must go and cancel all the life cover I've got. And he said, the client looked for a moment, and then the client says, actually, the story I'm telling me is a lot of nonsense, and I must take out life cover because that's the logical thing that I need to do. Is sometimes just challenging a client how they look at. Again, he didn't say he must take out life cover or try to logically explain the numbers, etc. He just used this, you know, paradox against the client story and saying, you know, okay, but in that sentence, if I must go with your story, actually, I must go and cancel all the life cover I've got. And while the client was thinking over that, he moved himself into, you know, the story I'm telling you is actually nonsense. And what is the alternative story that will actually serve me, my family, and everybody to a better point? So is again rolling with the resistance, not trying to change the client, but using that evoking questions, which in this case was, you know, going with that ambivalence and playing that off against each other. You know, in motivational interviewing, they also say actually the second part of that document you'll see is a lot of the questions actually haven't got question marks. They talk about asking a question without being a question is more making a statement. Like in this statement, Ted didn't ask or didn't make he didn't put a question forward in terms of saying to the client, I need to go and change. He put it as a statement out there. Is so sometimes not even asking a question for the client, but putting a statement out there, and it's then actually for the client to respond to the statement that we are putting out there. So yeah, thinking of then the 4-part process of engaging, building a rapport with the client, starting to build motivation, looking where the client are, is we can say that's part of establishing rapport in terms of the process. Then focusing is to a large extent is exploring the concern that the client have got, understanding what assessments the client is making, and what mood the client is in. Evoking is then moving to what is the possibilities we can create in terms of the process. What is the alternatives that we can help the client establish? And then lastly, moving to the phase of planning is then to say, what is the declarations the client can actually make, and what declarations the client actually want to make, get them to that point that they make declarations, and then engage them in terms of taking that ownership of the process and then moving on into the planning process as such. What thoughts comes up for you? What do you think? How can it work in terms of your process with clients, where you have got clients which you battle with, to make positive decisions or make changes in terms of their lives? They just go on as they go on. What comes up for you? What questions have you perhaps got?
I think it's not always logic that prevails in that, and there's an underlying emotional reason why they're acting the way they are. And I don't know that we as coaches, will get to that. It's, you can point out the logic in what they're telling themselves, but that's not necessarily what's driving the behavior underlying. And I think sometimes you have to dig deep to get to what that might be.
Yeah, and I think one can always use is the motivation is to a large extent driven by a mood, by the client's mood, and is to say, if one can start with, how does that make you feel? It let me feel despondent, or it causes a fear in me, etc. And one can then start moving, because that is the emotive side. If one can, instead of coming from, the logic and the numbers, and what is the story you're telling yourself, is if we can perhaps come from the emotive side, and then if there's an alternative story, how can one move to that part? So yeah, I don't know, thoughts. It's just word according to Hendrik.
They might, yeah, I think, but for some people, you're telling yourself a story that you don't even know that you're telling yourself. That's that subconscious kind of thing. And I think that's where some behaviors you want, that whole thing of, we don't deserve to be rich, or we don't deserve this, why? And I think, was it Madeleine that had that, what is that story that you're telling yourself? And to get through that, I think is challenging.
Yeah, and I think that's where, the process is perhaps for me, it's what is the evoking questions I can ask in those situations, is to side with the client and say, yeah, that is terrible. Yeah, that must be terrible. Yes, it's terrible. Okay, so if it's terrible, how is it impacting your current life and your future life? And start working from there. So yeah, and not to be. We don't want to go into the therapy like therapists will use it as. We just want to unearth their reality and create a new reality.
Yeah, and if they do need therapy, then identify that.
Yeah, is to say, I think,
yeah, you can't tell somebody, I think you need therapy.
I think there's nothing wrong with saying, I think we starting as a coach, I'm working forward and I'm working with the positives, but you're telling me horrible childhood stories.
Okay, in that way.
Yeah, I think, it could be of value for you to, do you know somebody? Have you got a program at work which you can go like ICAS, which you can engage with, or you know, what alternatives are there for you, because I'm not going to leave you as a financial coach. We're still going to work on your finances. However, I think there's other stuff that is keeping you from being able to deal with what you need to deal with, you know. And again, that it comes from the client, not us diagnosing, to your point, Annie. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Juanita, what's going through your mind?
Sorry, I also ran late. I got stuck in load shedding traffic. So I also only started at 20 minutes past, but I'm just absorbing everything you're saying. And for me, it's also interesting that, you know, like this whole thing about like us being in this mindset, it's our job to fix things. And I also step in that trap, where it's actually our job to guide the client to fix it themselves, because that is more like, then they are more likely to buy into the solution when it's their solution.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, Juanita, there's nothing wrong with it, because remember, especially for us that has been in the financial advisory business, is that was the value for many years that we created, is being advisors, and actually clients came to us and still come to us for advice. So they want advice, they want us actually to fix it. But and I don't want to say but, I actually need to say and. However, we now know better, is there's things that we've got the technical solutions for them, but however, a lot of what is actually causing the pain is for them to take a responsibility, and we can now bring that additional value add to them to say, you know, what is that other stuff, and what is perhaps some of that stuff that you need to dig deeper and think around, you know. I again just engaged with a client this morning, you know, just on something like goals, you know, just thinking about it. A young client, late 20s, doing great, however, caught up in the rat race, but 1,000 things as he was thinking through his finances and thinking through his goals. You know, I'm working very hard, but I'm not getting time to study. So I'm working very hard due to the fact that I actually want the salary increase. However, will it not perhaps make sense if you go and study further and get a better degree that can put you into a better position to actually get a better job, you know? So now we're getting, however, standing still to do that will mean that you need to put money aside. But on the other side, I want to buy a house, you know, okay, but what is more important, studying further or buying a house? Yeah, you know, now we get into that discussion, but instead of, I cannot give you the answer of, you know, how you must spend your money. It's first you need to clarify what is the most important things that you need to apply your mind to, and how is that going to form part of your plan going forward. And then we can start, then you can decide about how you are going to allocate money, and then you will start working towards the plan that you want. So first we need to find out, you know, how do you prioritize, because it's clearly these things is causing the client anxiety, you know, between the different things. I want more, however, I want to study further. I also want to be more healthy, all of that, those things. And then we can start igniting the fire between, you know, the client will ignite their own fire towards where they want to go, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, so I've recently worked with a client where when we first met, she was completely an anxiety riven, you know, like stressed out of a tree, because she felt like she's an artist, and she felt like she lived an artist life from hand to mouth, and So I said to her, so let's go look and see what you earn. And then, so I did from my side, something that's too overwhelming for somebody in that kind of industry. So I went through the bank statements and line by line, I categorized each. Just hold on for a second. I work from home, and then when the dog's here, the daddy is going for a walk. So I helped her to show her what she was spending, and it turns out like just the fact that she could see she was bringing in 130,000 rand a month. For her, the penny dropped that she's actually not poor, but she has no idea that the money's going out as fast as it's coming in. And for her, like that, just I think so. That's not a coaching thing, I think, but I didn't do any financial planning. I just communicated to her, and I've just met with her this week, and she was just in a completely different place because she felt like she knew that, she was getting her spending under control, and already she felt like she was better off.
Yeah. So if we can apply the model, then and it's a beautiful example, Juanita, is the client have got the capability to earn. The client have got the capability to engage with people and sell and do a lot of work. So the thing is then, how do you start building wealth for yourself? Because you've got a lot of income that comes in, but where does it go? So like you say, getting her to take control of the spending is definitely a behavioral thing, because what is the story she was telling herself not to manage the outflow, so and that's the coaching part, is how do we get that client now to start engaging and saying, and then as part of that is, what is the life that you actually want to create for yourself? Because that is the vision part, and the goals part is, what is that? Because there is something else than, I'm just an artist. I'm a very successful artist to bring in that amount of income. However, what is the life that I want to create? Is there something about freedom, and how does freedom look for me? And so now we can start working with which is a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, but for her, I think the switch just happened between the first two meetings we had and the last meeting we had. She went from a struggling artist to being a successful artist.
Yeah.
Because now, like, all her creative juices is going, because she realized like she is actually making money.
Yeah.
And now like the financial planning starts because now she wants to do this and she wants to do that. And now like we're having some of those conversations to empower her on her financial journey.
Yeah. And you've done brilliantly there, because that's the thing, because she's actually doing better than many professionals, so fantastic. Yes, Johan.
So, Jonita, that is a great example and I think for me, it's a conversation I had with Hendrik some time ago. Has somebody ever doubted the value that a financial coach adds to them? I think that client will probably be your best advocate to say, to speak, not about the financial value and such, but the overall life value that you've added to them.
Thanks for that, Johan. And I think that's the big thing, and more I as I work with this is the question about what is the actual value that we're adding to clients. I think it's creating I think it's an experience that makes it less tangible, and however, with that experience comes the other part is, we bring that peace of mind to that client, because that client most probably, to your point, Juanita, moved from an anxious person to a very ambitious person, you know, in the process, and that's the actual value that we create for clients, and you know, and it's how do we build on that as such. So yeah.